My name is Stevie Ward. Today is April 23rd, 2018. The time is 6:20, and we are at St. John's Northwestern Military Academy. I'm interviewing John Miller, who was born on July 5th, 1933, in Rensselaer, Indiana, and served in the Korean War between December 13th, 1951, and December 12th, 1959. John Miller was an engineman in the U.S. Navy and worked in the engine room making fresh water. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Where were you living before you entered the service?
Milwaukee.
What were you doing at the time?
Well, I was right out of high school. I was working on the Surgeon's Mink Ranch in Pewaukee.
And when did you join the service?
I joined that in 1951, and I joined the reserve in Navy Reserve because they were at that time the draft was on. The Korean War was in all its glory, and yeah, I didn't want to particularly go in the Army.
How long did it take you to get out of the reserves?
Well, you signed up for 8 years, but I put the 2 years of active duty from 1952 to 54. So that was in between the time. But I was discharged from the reserve in 1959.
And how long did it take for you, or why did you join?
Well, I wanted to go in the Navy rather than any of the other branches of service, and because grew up on Pewaukee Lake and done everything on the water, the boating and everything that was out there, so it just seemed natural to go into the Navy rather than the Army.
Tell me about your early weeks of training and how you adapted to military life.
Well, you have to adapt to the military life. It's different when you're in boot camp. For one thing, they make you feel like you really aren't very important, so and you obey your chief petty officer and everything that he does.
Do you have any memorable experiences from that time?
Oh, sure. We met some nice guys in the service in there. They were, and I knew them all through through boot camp. Most of them, they sort of disappeared after boot camp. I didn't really keep in touch with any of them.
Did you serve with any in the Navy?
Not with anybody that I went through boot camp with.
Was there anything particularly difficult about training or your first weeks of service?
Well, I think that the whole thing is different when you go into the service. For one thing, you're washing your clothes every day, and it's not through with a wash machine or anything like that. You scrub them by hand, and then you hang them up to dry. And they used I think they didn't use clothespins then. They used a little piece of rope. I forget what they called it. But you tied your clothes to the clothesline with a square knot. Everything had square knots in it, and they were checked. That was.
Did you have to learn to tie a bunch of different knots?
We were supposed to. I never did.
And so you said you served in the Korean War?
Yep, I was in the Korean War.
Where did you go after boot camp?
I went to Astoria, Oregon. There was a naval base up there, Tongue Point Naval Station, which is no longer there.
What did you do while you were up there?
Well, I did machinery histories. I got up to Astoria, Oregon, and they looked for volunteers, people that knew how to typewrite. So it was raining. It was a miserable day, and I figured I'll work in an office. I'll typewrite rather than go out there wandering around those ships. And that was a pretty smart decision because it rained a lot up there. It was in the coast, and we did machinery histories, they called, on a bunch of World War II LSTs that were in there in dry dock, and they were in mothballs. Really, is what they were.
Where did you go after that?
Well, after I guess they ran out of things to do up there. I got shipped to Long Beach, California, to pick up a destroyer.
What was the name of the ship?
That was a USS Blue.
And what was your job on the ship?
Well, they put me in the engine room. That was my job. It was my workstation, and then I went on watch. My watch was a permanent one, is making fresh water. So you do a 4-hour stint on your watch. You made fresh water. And the forward evaporator that I was running made about 1,000 gallons an hour in fresh water. And they had an evaporator in the after engine room, which made about 500 gallons an hour. So we were producing about 1,500 gallons of water an hour with those. And then most of that water went to be used in the boiler rooms to run the turbines that ran the ship. And every once in a while, a chief would stick his head down in the engine room there and tell him, you're going to start putting water in the freshwater tanks now. So salt it a little bit. And the reason he wanted to do that, because what went into the boilers was complete distilled water. And if you've ever tried to use distilled water you can't wash the soap off. Once you get soap on it just doesn't come off. So they used to have you just salt it a little bit, make it harder water, and then if it wasn't right, the whole crew knew who was making fresh water.
What was it like working in the engine room?
It was hot. It was about 110 degrees down there most of the time. And one of the jobs I had in the engine room, besides the oiling and greasing and doing things like that, but was I had I was a filter for the main the reduction gear. It was on the engine, and it was a lube oil purifier is what they called it, but it was nothing but a big, like an oil filter on your car. And you'd go over and take that all apart and take these, they had discs, steel discs in them. You'd take those out and wipe them off and put them all out, and then after they're all cleaned off, then you put them back in again and turn the oil back on, so we go through the things and make sure it didn't leak. And that was something I did. I think 2 or 3 times a week I cleaned that filter out. And that was back in a corner of the engine room. It was about 130 degrees back there. You worked just a little while back there, and then you stepped out and went under one of the ventilators to cool down. It always took me probably half an hour or more to work on that thing, but the chief always sent me back to do it. I don't know.
Were there jobs you and your coworkers tried to avoid?
Nah, there wasn't anything really that you tried to avoid. You went along and did whatever you had to.
On the USS Blue, what was daily life like?
Daily life, well, it was pretty routine. It was a 6 o'clock reveille, and then you had you called. Made sure that nobody fell overboard overnight, so you had a muster in the morning, and you had breakfast, and then you went to work at your duty station.
How much free time did you have?
Pretty or none.
How did people entertain themselves?
Well, we had movies on the fantail at night when weather permitted. It wasn't washing waves over the fantail. You sit out there and watch a movie, but no, you at sea. When you're at sea, you're working between 12 and 16 hours a day.
Did you stay in touch with your family?
Oh yeah, you wrote letters back and forth all the time, but your mail was always 2 or 3 weeks late and coming, and that included the newspapers, because I used to get the Pewaukee newspaper. My dad would always send that to me, and it was always 3 weeks late, so you found out what went on last month after it had come out.
How did you get mail on the ship?
Oh, they had a regular mail call. They'd bring it in on, when we refueled at sea, they had a high line coming across, and they'd send the mail in that way.
And where did you travel on the USS Blue?
Well, we came out of Long Beach, went to Hawaii, and then went to Japan out of there, and Japan to Formosa, to China, and all up along the Korean coast.
What did you do when you weren't in Korea?
Well, anytime we were not in Korea, that's when we were. Yokosuka was our main base in Japan, and we used to be there most of the time. But we also were in Sasebo, Kobe, and I forget the other one now. But there was about 3 of them that we would be in too.
What did you do while on leave?
You mean in Japan and that stuff? Well, you just had your time. You'd have a day off, but you'd have to be back in the ship by midnight. So you didn't go too far.
How long did you spend in Japan?
Well, we'd be in there probably 4 or 5 days at a time. Then we'd be back on patrol off Korea. That was.
Was there anything you had to do in Japan?
No, I had another guy, Phil Poling, and we did a lot of cameras stuff, and we got to know the Sakura camera shop in Yokosuka, and we got to know those people real well, and they were friends. In fact, one night we had tea, I think, in their house with them. They invited us back, and we had sitting around a hibachi stove and having tea.
What did you think of your officers or your fellow soldiers?
Well, you have great respect for the captain of the ship because he's responsible for everything. Anything goes wrong, it's the captain that gets blamed for it, and so you have a pretty good working relationship with the captain of the crew. There's most of the officers were really real good.
Could you share with me an example of strong leadership you encountered in the military?
Well, I think the captain of the ship is what you'd call strong leadership, but the chief petty officers that were in charge, like in the engine room, we had 3 different chiefs that would work in there. These men were all Second World War veterans. Most of them had been promoted to officers before or during the Second World War, and then they reverted back to chief petty officers after the war's end. But of course, they were sticking around to retire at the highest rank that they held, and then so they get a bigger retirement.
Do you have any significant examples
Of a chief?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a chief petty officer that was he was a master at arms in when I was in Tongue Point, Oregon, and it was really funny because I was on the ship going into Korea. I think it was on the ammunition ship, and this chief, I know he'd been Second World War. He had an artificial hand, which was, I thought, unusual. He was still in service, and he was on board ship with me. He was on his way into Korea when I saw him last. That was he was always a good leader and quite a guy.
Did you see combat in Korea?
Oh yeah, we spent all of our time north of the 38th parallel up along the coast of Korea.
What was it like there?
Well, it was sometimes just boring. And in fact, I've just within the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 months there, I sent for the ship's logs, and the ship's logs tell you the position of the ship. And I wanted the 27th of July 1953, and I got those, and I got a few days before and a few days afterwards on the logs too. But they give you the latitude and longitude of the ship every day and just where it was and so forth. So I told them that's what I wanted them for, because I never knew where we were. It was always a big surprise.
What was it like on shore duty?
On shore duty? Well, shore duty was okay. That was working in an office up there. That was in Astoria, Oregon. That was supposedly good duty.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
Oh, I think when I went across to, we left Long Beach right after I got on the Blue. I got the 4 to 8 watch, which was the real bad one, and so I was working in the engine room all day. But you'd work the engine room from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and of course you'd go on watch until 8 o'clock that night, and then you could sleep until 4 the next morning, or 3:30 when they'd get you up, and you'd go back on watch till 8 o'clock and then you'd go back to your 8 hours in the engine room again. And I was spending 16 hours a day in the engine room, and I got to Hawaii. I had my legs were swollen up, and I was having trouble walking. And so I reported to sick bay, and this doctor was in there. He says, most of these guys come in here with a headache or something. He says a cut finger. He says, you wait till you can't walk. So he sent me right to the hospital, and they ran tests on me for about a week and a half, and couldn't find nothing wrong with me. Finally asked me what I thought was wrong, and I told him I was come off working in an office and come on the ship and work 16 hours a day down in a hot engine room, and I said, on your feet on the steel deck plates down there. And so that's what he wrote up. That was my medical report. And that's why I missed the ship from leaving Hawaii. And I flew across from Hawaii to Yokosuka. And I got to Yokosuka, and there was the ship's crew was there. I went to the EM club, and there was the crew from the Blue. So I saw an officer there, and I told him, I told him I thought it was going to be in Sasebo. I said, but the crew's right here if you want to change my orders. Yeah, he says, we don't change your orders, you just go right ahead. So I went down to Sasebo, and then I caught an ammunition ship there. They put me on, it was the Mount Baker, and that's when I went up to Korea. That's when I first saw Korea. I was on this ammunition ship. They said the hold that there was about 5 of us in transit. We slept in on little army cots on that hold. He says there was 4 decks of ammunition below us, and both decks were lined with 2-ton blockbuster bombs. They were about to, and I got up there that one day, and they highlined me across to a DE which is a little smaller than a destroyer, but they highlined me across to that, and I got on there, and it was a real motley crew. They had their sleeves were cut off, and they had their dungarees cut off into shorts. And there was no place else you could do that in the Navy. And even the captain up there was wearing a baseball hat, and he was so. I was just on that a short time, and they highlined me across again to I went across to a tanker. It was on there, and I got on this. On the ammunition ship, I was going to leave that, and they highlined me across to this DE, and it was back to back on the bosun chair that they were going to send us across on this high line. And I was climbing, and this chief petty officer, and he grabbed me by the shoulder. He says, "No," he says, "you got an officer going across." He says, "He's going to get wet." So I waited until he went across. He got wet. They dipped him in real good, and I got on. I never got not a drop of water. It went right over, and wasn't on that ship too long. And they highlined me across to a tanker, and it was just getting dark when it was the Blue came in into the tanker for refueling, and they highlined me across to the Blue. I had one of the chief petty officers. The first one I got on there, he said, "I thought we got rid of you." He said, so, and that was my greeting coming on board there. But so that was probably the highlight of the whole trip. Was getting highlined 3 times in one day.
What is highlighting like?
Well, it wasn't much. It's what are they doing? They're doing it now. What's this here?
Zip lining?
Yeah, zip lining.
Like
it's about like zip lining.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall any other humorous or unusual events?
No, not really. As I said, it was we practiced general quarters going all the way across, and they'd go into general quarters going across, and because we traveled in a convoy going over, and it was general quarters. There'd be guys 5 minutes later, they're still stumbling around to get to their battle station, but when I got on board there, and it was the first night I was on there, they had the call for battle stations, and I think it was 10 seconds, and everybody was right where they were supposed to be.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Oh yeah, I got a few.
What did you get?
Oh, I got the combat action ribbon. I've got China service. National defense. I got a Korean campaign and battle star, and the United Nations ribbon, and I have won the ribbon awarded to us by the Korean medal by the president of South Korea. Awarded that one.
What did you do to receive some of them?
Just be there.
What do you consider to be your most important contribution during your service?
I don't know. Probably making fresh water on board the ship that kept it going.
Why was fresh water so crucial?
Well, they're powered by steam turbines, and the steam turbines get the water first. If you don't make enough water, the crew doesn't get any fresh water because the engines come first.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Oh yeah, I was released. I not discharged, but I was released from duty it was in Long Beach, California, and I rode back to another guy that was from the Blue, got discharged same time I did, and he had a car out there, so I rode with him back to Tennessee to his home, and then I took the train back to Pewaukee.
What did it feel like to go back?
Well, it felt pretty good.
Did you go back to work?
Yeah, I went back, worked on the mink ranch.
What were you doing on this?
Well, I did everything from feeding them and to pelting to do just about everything on the mink ranch. But
Did you go back to school?
yeah, I went back. I went to Spencerian Business College, and then I went into flying. I got my commercial pilot's license and multi-engine rating out of it. That was all under the GI Bill. Mm-hmm. That was the whole thing.
Did you make any close friends in the service?
Oh yeah, sure. We go to every year we have like your convention or your get together with the people. Like this year, it's going to be in Brookfield, Wisconsin, but last year was in Seattle, Washington, and you meet the same people. Right now, there's a lot of people in the people that we're meeting in there are Vietnam veterans, but there was the first one I went to was in Ohio, or right across the river there from Ohio. The first convention I went to, there was two people from the forward engine room that I served with were at that meeting. But since then, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago, we were in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I had 5 people from the forward engine room that served with me on board the ship. So that was pretty interesting meeting with them. But we still correspond with about four couples that were.
Are you still really very close with any of them?
Oh sure, we still.
What are some life lessons you learned from the military service?
Well, I think your comradeship, for one thing. You're going. You have lifelong friends that you've met, that you serve with in service. So it's it's funny, you don't see each other for several years, but it's like you never forget them. You know them.
Has your service or your time at the service impacted how you are today?
I don't know if it has or not. I don't know if it's impacted me in any way, but it's I don't know what has impacted me.
Have you taken part in the honor flight?
Oh sure, yes.
What was that experience like?
It was about 2 years ago, and it's for one thing, it's very well organized. They keep busy all day long. It's a long day. I think it's from about 4 in the morning till midnight, when all told. But it was what impressed me the most was I'd been there and received, when veterans had come in on this flight, so I knew what to expect in Milwaukee, and that's quite awesome anyway. But we got to Washington D.C., and there was this big line of people in Washington D.C. shaking your hands and doing everything, and I thought, this is amazing. These are There's complete strangers, and you're strangers to them. It's not like coming into Milwaukee where you got friends and family to greet you, but out there, these people must meet every flight coming in there. There's hundreds of these flights coming in on this, but they're there every day. And then another one, when I was there, Senator Dole was at the World War II. Him and his wife were at the World War II Memorial, and they shook hands with everybody that came through.
Did you meet any friends or anyone that you were in the service with?
No, not on on the flight. No.
Could you tell me about what you have on the table here?
Oh, we got several pictures. I didn't know what. Well, I've got a picture of the blue that I served with. I've got some other pictures of it refueling, and I've got a picture of our chief that I was in boot camp with, Chief Hoyne, and I have one here of a few of the LSTs that were in Astoria, Oregon, and I got my own that was taken in Yokosuka, and I got another one was Phil Poling and I when we were in Yokosuka. It was I went on Liberty quite a bit with Phil. It was.
And that was in Japan?
Yeah, those were all in Japan, yeah.
Are you still friends with him today?
No, he passed away about 3 years ago.
What was your boot camp commander like?
Well, he was okay. He was typical chief in boot camp. He was very stern, but very fair.
He was always a strong leader.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, he had red stripes on too. He had about 12 or 16 years in the Navy. I seen it all red, and that's if they had good conduct is gold stripes, and he had red ones. So he was a good sailor.
And so you said that the USS Blue ran on steam power, right?
Right.
But it also needed to be refueled.
Well, they burned oil in the boilers in order to heat the boilers. A ship like that is those steam turbines take steam. It's pressured to 800 degrees superheat, 600 pounds of pressure going in there, and that the destroyer develops about 60,000 pound or 60,000 horsepower. It drives that destroyer. And it's a lot of horsepower.
Was it a fast ship?
Yeah, they do about 34 knots. They're not fast, I don't think, by today's standards anymore. But they were up through Vietnam. That was a pretty fast destroyer.
How long did it take to get to Korea?
Well, we were, as I say, with a convoy, and you're traveling was probably rated to less than 15 knots. So it's pretty slow. It took a couple of weeks to get over to Korea. That's why I flew over after spending a week and a half in the hospital, and I was there about the same time the destroyer got there.
So what are these right here?
Oh, those are the ribbons. Those are the ribbons. I went just explained those.
So okay, what was it like to sleep on the USS Blue? Or the living conditions?
It was crowded. I've since heard that they were constantly investigating the living conditions, because they said the living conditions during the 50s were terrible on the destroyers. But I know that my bunk was in the after part of the ship, and it had ventilation pipes up above it, and I had to sleep on my stomach or my back because you couldn't turn sideways, and it was that close.
How tall were the bunks?
Well, they're only 3 high, and I don't know if it's a 7-foot ceiling in there. That's about all it would be. You got 3 bunks, then below the bottom bunk is 3 lockers, and that's where you have 1 locker that keeps all your stuff in it.
Did you get to choose where you slept?
Where?
In the bunks, did you get to choose your bunk?
No, you're assigned your bunks. You're assigned all this things. And in fact, I've got that somewhere at home too. They give you a piece of paper. It tells you what you're supposed to be at your general quarters, where you're supposed to be, where your fire station is, and what everything is. It's all on a piece of paper. They got to know exactly where you're supposed to be at any time. And that was another thing that as we were coming back, of course, the ship had been running constantly for over 6 months, and things, especially electric motors and that stuff, started overheating. And I remember one time my fire station was a #1 fire and flushing pump. I remember that. And I'm sitting there making fresh water that one day, and the fire alarm went off. So I was on watch, so I'm waiting to get relieved so I could go to my fire station. I turned around. My fire station was on the next deck below me, and the flame was shooting up about 7 feet high from that motor on the #1. So that was my fire station burned up. So I didn't have any more fire station from that on in.
So was it strict about where you had to be at what time?
Oh yeah. You had to be at where you're supposed to be at any given time. You're supposed to be there. There wasn't any excuses.
Mm-hmm. So leadership was very strict on.
Oh yeah, anytime. I mean, that's important on any ship.
Did you become good friends with any of the people who slept around you?
Oh sure. As I say, we were in contact with about 3 of them now. There, 3 of them that live in Iowa yet, and of course on these reunions that we have with the ships every year, I've known a lot of people that served on the Blue, and and so we're in contact with them too. That's okay.
In closing, this has been an interview of John Miller regarding his service during the Korean War. My name is Stevie Ward. The time is 6:53. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.